From what I can see on social media, he seems like a good dad and River looks happy and healthy. Sarah moved into her own apartment with Tom's help and got a part-time job so she could take care of River while still having some income. She stopped trying to contact me, which was a relief because I was tired of being dragged into her drama. Update 2. Well, I was wrong about being done with this situation. Last month Sarah showed up at my apartment again, but this time it was different from her previous visits. She looked put together and calm, not desperate and crying like before. She said she'd been in therapy and had some things she wanted to say to me and asked if I'd be willing to give her 10 minutes to talk. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Sarah sat down and said she'd been working with a therapist to understand why she'd made such poor decisions during our relationship and the whole affair situation. She said her therapist had helped her recognize that she'd been struggling with some deep insecurities about our relationship and that she'd been looking for validation and excitement outside our partnership instead of dealing with those feelings directly. She admitted that she'd been selfish and had justified her behavior by convincing herself that our relationship was already over. Sarah also acknowledged that refusing to get a paternity test had been completely irrational and unfair to everyone involved. She said she'd been so caught up in the fantasy of her relationship with Marcus that she'd ignored obvious red flags and made decisions based on wishful thinking instead of reality. I'll admit this was more self-awareness than Sarah had ever shown before. And it was nice to hear her take actual responsibility for her actions instead of blaming circumstances or other people. But I also knew that Sarah was smart and manipulative. So I was waiting to see what she actually wanted from me. She said she wasn't trying to get back together or asking me to help raise River because she understood that I'd moved on and that she'd burned those bridges with her behavior. But she wanted to make amends for the pain she'd caused me. And she was hoping we could eventually have some kind of civil relationship since we'd been such a big part of each other's lives. That seemed reasonable enough, and I appreciated that she wasn't asking for anything concrete from me. I told her I was glad she was getting help and taking responsibility and that I hoped she could build a good life for herself and River going forward. But then Sarah said there was one more thing she needed to tell me. And this is where things got weird again. She said that during her therapy sessions she'd been exploring her feelings about the whole paternity situation and she'd realized that part of her had been hoping River would turn out to be my son after all. Sarah said that even though she'd convinced herself Marcus was the father, there had been a part of her that was secretly relieved when his DNA test came back negative because it meant there was still a chance River could be mine and we could potentially work things out. She said she'd been disappointed when Tom turned out to be the real father, not because Tom wasn't a good guy but because it meant she'd lost any connection to me permanently. She said she'd realized that I'd been the best partner she'd ever had and that leaving me had been the biggest mistake of her life. I could see where this was going and I cut her off before she could keep talking. I told her that I appreciated her honesty but that it didn't change anything.